Okay, so I see that we've got lots of our regular peeps on the call. There's a couple of people that I haven't seen for a while. So Tony Rice, I'm going to call you out. I see you are here. And I see we're still letting people in. But in the meantime, so as to not delay and start late, I'm going to start with an introduction here. So good afternoon and a very, very warm welcome to you all. Happy New Year. Hope that all of you have had some downtime to relax and replace during the holiday season. So show of hands, who is relaxed and ready to rock and roll for 2022? Okay, this is not very good. This is not very good. I'm not very comforted by this. Anyhow, okay. So this is our first event for 2022, and we're very privileged to have Sean Culey with us this afternoon. So Sean's going to be talking about the rise of the intelligent organization, decision-making in the digital age. So we all know that technology is changing at a frightening pace. Business realities are being altered, supply chains fractured, and geopolitics look more unstable than ever. The resultant market turbulence and supply uncertainty have made the ability to make accurate strategic and operational decisions more challenging than ever at a time when they have never been more critical. But while technology advances exponentially, our ability to master this technology and learn the skills needed to succeed in this market do not. So how do companies look at these new tools and how can they use them to make decisions to match the speed of the market? So I have to tell you that firstly, I'm not a fan of technology and I shouldn't be saying things like this on a public platform. But I kind of get the Microsoft Office thing. I work on Excel and PowerPoint and Word and all those things. But recently, LinkedIn challenged me to take a quiz on Excel and Microsoft Word, which I thought I'd do well because I've done this for years. Well, I failed dismally. In my defense, it was late at night, and I think the questions were asked in a way that would trip me up. But I think the reality of it is I probably just didn't know enough. So you think you know what you think you know, but you don't know. So this is a very simple example of technology. But the reality of the situation is that we have to get on top of it, not only in order to stay alive, but to be relevant and to match our competitors. So I want to say a big welcome to Sean Culey, who is a long-standing friend of the SAPIES community. And if you haven't heard of him, shame on you, and you have probably been living under a rock somewhere. Sean is the author of Transition Point, From Steam to Singularity. It's an in-depth examination of the causes and technological progress and how the current wave of change will disrupt our business models, economy, and society at large. It is a must read for everybody. So right now, I'm going to stop jabbering. I'm going to hand you over to Sean. And everybody enjoy the session. I have absolutely no doubt that you will. And we will take questions at the end. So feel free to post them in the chat. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you, Tonya. Thanks for the very gracious welcome. And it's a privilege to be speaking at the inaugural 2022 SAPIES webinar. And thank you for inviting me. Yeah, I'm going to quickly share my screen, if I may, just get the presentation up. And some of you may have heard me talk before. Some of you, those of you who haven't, wear a number of different hats. I've worked with Cranfield University, Cranfield School of Management over in the UK, where I'm a visiting fellow. I'm the author of Transition Point, as Tonya so graciously said. I'm also a Score P professional and a fellow at the Chartered Institute in Logistics and Transport. And I guess I'm probably best known for a lot of sort of my keynotes and masterclasses on helping companies to transform, not just in terms of the technology, but in terms of their mindsets and their behaviors, and aligning any technological activities behind a very clear sort of value chain strategy. Now, I've recently started working with some Silicon Valley organization, one particular Silicon Valley organization in particular, called ERA, who I will very briefly mention in here, because I became really interested in what I see as being a paradigm shifting technological leap that's being available to organizations. And while I don't want to demonstrate any technology today, because that's not right, I will go through some of the sort of mindset shifts and the potential that these technologies actually can bring to organizations if they're able to sort of change the way they think from the way things used to run to the way the things they're going to run moving forwards. So I'll start off then. This many of you probably heard this term before, this VUCA term. I use it always at the start of my presentations because it's a term that has been used and co-opted by people like Gartner for a long time to sort of describe the world since 2008, really. I think I first heard it in 2010, and it's a military term, like I said, it's been co-opted, but it stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, and it kind of describes the world that we live in right now. Now, as well over a decade now, I've been hearing organizations use this word to describe the current environment, but the one thing that really intrigued me particularly was, why is it VUCA? And that seemed to be something that no one really explored or understood, to be fair. It was just kind of an acceptance that we live in a very, very volatile, uncertain and complex world. It's a very ambiguous, but why do we do that? And to cut a long story short, I spent a lot of time researching this for my book. And in summary, one of the things that I identified, not personally identified, so, there were people before me who had made this identification, but we go through waves of change. So change is never linear, it's cyclical. And actually 2008 represented the sort of collapse of what was the fifth wave, the computer age, debt bubble collapse, subprime mortgages, all this sort of stuff. Because what was happening there was money had moved away from innovation and had moved towards financial vehicles where it was easy to make money because the market was very mature. That collapsed. And then we enter a new wave. And I've been talking about this now for, I guess, probably, I mean, SAPIX, I first did my first keynote at SAPIX in, I believe it was 2014. So for, a good 6, 7, 8 years now. And we were very much in the transition period at that point in time. So this arrow used to almost point almost completely sort of vertically down. Now we're in the upswing. Now this is where it gets really interesting, because when I was starting to talk about this, we were going through that transition, but it didn't really feel quite as disruptive as it does right now. But now we really are in the most disruptive of periods. And one of the points that I like to make to people that actually, generally causes an element of fear is, the one thing you really need to understand is that the rate of change that we're going through right now is pretty much as slow as it's going to be moving forwards. It's only going to speed up. So the rate of change will never again be as slow as it is today. And what we're seeing in this is a whole series of paradigm shifts. So as we've come out of the fifth wave and we've moved into the sixth wave, we're seeing a number of different changes in the way, organizations have operated, and also a way the consumers and their position in the buying cycle has changed. So we've gone from a world where the company has been very much in control of the process to one where actually now the consumer's in control. We're moving away from a sort of single channel fixed cost model into one that's actually omni-channel with a whole degree of variable costs. We've moved away from physical shopping at set times, going to a retailer on a weekend, out of store retail or at evenings, to one where actually we decide when we want to shop. And we also not only decide where we want to shop, but we also decide where we want the goods to arrive. So rather than the consumer traveling to the retailer, we now have the retailer delivering to the consumer, which means we're moving from a sort of a linear push supply chain to much more cyclical pull value chains. And products themselves, people are moving away from just wanting a product, a commodity, a mass-produced item, actually to getting something that's much more personal, to more personal services, more personal experiences. And we're also seeing a very interesting shift with things like servitization, where rather than owning the asset, we now really what we need is the access to the service. So for example, rather than having to buy a car to move everywhere, we can just hire transport as a service, but we can also hire software as a service. We can hire artificial intelligence as a service, manufacturing as a service, logistics as a service. So suddenly, rather than owning all of these different assets and trying to figure everything out for ourselves, we can now just access them when we need them and pay for the amount we actually use. And of course, one of the most interesting things that's actually happened in this last wave, certainly from when I was growing up, nearly all my interactions, in fact, pretty much every single interaction I had was with a human, whereas now most of our interactions are with machines, either a web-based machine online or we're taking payments versus, touchless or contactless payment systems. We're talking to chat bots, constantly our interactions are more now with machines than they are with humans. So a huge breadth of different paradigm shifting changes taking place in the sort of commercial and supply chain world. And of course, one of the things that's driven a lot of this is, things like smartphones, for example, and 4G telephony. Everything is becoming digitized, automated, and simple to use. So things that used to take us, huge amounts of effort to produce, things like the yellow pages, for example, and manuals and all that sort of stuff, and generated quite a large amount of distribution effort, are now basically free, and they're accessed digitally, and they consume very little in terms of physical transportation, physical supply chains, but they're also updated consistently. But it's changing the expectations now of our consumers. We expect everything to be accessible in the same way as we can get things on apps. So everything from the yellow pages in the UK, which used to be the only way you find out someone's telephone number, to your business's telephone number, to the user manuals behind your motor car or whatever device it is, or the Encyclopedia Britannica, which if your parent was rich enough to afford all 20 volumes, you had what was almost the entirety of sort of available knowledge for most people there. And even things like maps, they're all things of the past now, because we expect these to be on an app on our phone that we hold in our pockets. And we carry them around, and we were expecting increasingly personalized services. Now, that creates an enormous amount of pressure for supply chains to transform, to adapt this new model. So as I said earlier, we're moving away from these push product change into these much more customer-centric, demand-driven value networks. And as Mark Engels, the Chief Supply Chain Officer of Unilever, says, supply chain is no longer a chain, it's now a circle with the customer at its heart. And that's really what we need to be thinking about here. We need to put the customer at the center of our business model, and then figuring out how to serve their needs around them rather than putting them at the end. And of course, what this is doing is actually, it's increasing exponentially the level of complexity that we face in supply chains. So our expectations from our customers have gone from low to high, but product life cycles have gone from long to short. So we're constantly bringing out new and better versions of products. The complexity of products have gone from low to high. The variety has gone from low to high. The number of long lead time parts has gone from few to many. The level of forecast accuracy we can predict in this unpredictable world has gone from high to low. The level of customization, as we go increasing towards personalization, has gone from low to high. And quite interestingly, specifically if you're anything to do with sort of e-commerce, the amount of returns we see from customers has gone from low to high. And what we mean by that is really, if we take apparel for an example, anything between 56 to 60% of what is bought online actually goes back. And in fact, the average, because most of the sort of commercial companies that deal with e-commerce, the single biggest source of inventory now into their warehouses is returns. Whereas previously returns was just a small corner of the warehouse where, there was a few things in. Now it's a huge new, extreme and reverse supply chain that has to be managed completely separately. So if we look at our supply chain triangle, we're seeing these consistently, downward sort of pressures on terms of reliability, responsiveness, agility, whilst also an upward pressure on cost and purchasing costs and warehousing costs and transportation costs, increasingly needing more capital employed in terms of either inventory or cash or fixed assets to manage it. So we've seen pressures on each corner of the supply chain triangle. And then we have something like COVID that comes along, which just provides rocket fuel for all of this chaos. It's changed the very nature of society. We've moved from a population which used to be able to buy things whenever they wanted it, usually physically, to one where they're mostly buying things now online. They don't like handling cash anymore. They want on-demand access to goods and services, preferring things that don't involve biological delivery methods if you could. Interestingly, we're seeing a move back to more locally produced goods, People have suddenly got used to not traveling to the office, and some people are not too keen to go back to the office. We're seeing lots of noise about avoiding social distancing, etc., etc. And of course, the disruptive outcome of that is that, we've seen a big boom for things like companies like Amazon, but also some of the large shopping malls are really struggling. We're seeing business models having to change for food establishments and establishment of things like dark stores and ghost kitchens. We're moving towards cashless, contactless payment systems. One-hour delivery services using increasingly automated urban warehouses. People are looking at things like delivery robots and drones and actually potentially preferring them over humans because there isn't human hands touching the product. Seeing demand for fresh local produce, etc., etc. So there's a whole different series of changes that are taking place in a radically short period of time, and most companies are really struggling to catch up. So what we used to think was quite rare, these sort of black swans events, are now blinking everywhere. So we've gone from barely seeing a black swan to suddenly we can't move for them. And we're becoming the norm. And what it's really doing is exposing the fragility of our global supply chains. And a lot of companies now, their sort of strategic directives have moved away from sort of low cost and lean to much more resilience and agility. And we've seen headlines like this. And really what it's done is it's saying that, as companies in the fifth wave focus very much on efficiency and on outsourcing and offshoring and leaning their supply chains, what they've found now is that actually all of that activity to lean their supply chains has left them perilously exposed as we move into this disruptive upswing. And as I say at the bottom there, many companies are now beginning to find out what the true cost of low cost actually is. And the interesting thing about these black swans is it isn't just the one event, because each one of those has a knock-on effect. So black swan events have black swan reactions. These black swan reactions have black swan consequences, and those consequences have impacts. So just as a very short example, we have a pandemic. That's the event, that's the black swan. We didn't see this coming. Of course, the reaction that also no one could really predict, because it never happened before, was governments instructing people to stay at home. The consequences of that, and one of the consequences of that is, and certainly, in a lot of countries, we saw a massive explosion in pet ownership because people working from home suddenly had time to walk dogs, etc. They didn't have to go on commutes, but also they were lonely and they looked to pets for company. And that caused a huge global pet food shortage. And it also caused a whole increase in pet theft as well. That happened in the UK, certainly, but I don't know if it happened in other places. But, the value of pets themselves went up exponentially. But if you was the planner in the pet food company, how would you have predicted that? Which model would you have been able to predict that says, well, what happens if there's a global pandemic and the government reaction to that global pandemic is it forces everyone to come at home, and those people that are at home get lonely and buy lots of dogs, and the demand for pet food goes up 40 to 45% in 6 months? What model would have predicted that? There isn't one. So we're now in a world where the unpredictable becomes almost a norm. So it's predictable that things are going to be unpredictable, but we need better tools than we had in the past in order to enable us to model and react to these kind of situations. So the reality for companies in this new digital age is what we're seeing right now is that consumer expectations are becoming too demanding. Our human employees are effectively too slow to react. Our forecasting is becoming too inaccurate. The number of data points that are hitting our business every day are too numerous. Our traditional planning cycles are far too infrequent. These black swans are becoming far too common, but our human behavior is too irrational. It's based very much on our past experiences and our biases, which are particularly embedded in our behaviors. And also our legacy systems that we've used to run the business in the sort of more stable downswing period are now too disconnected. And it's very difficult to get a single perspective on what's going on in our organization. And what we really want is we want supply chains that can adapt in real time, all the time. What's preventing companies from making that leap, however, is the fact that a lot of their fifth wave legacy issues are holding them back. Their IT infrastructure, it's difficult to manage, it's expensive to maintain. They're constantly introducing new IT systems, which they have considerable concerns about the scalability, access, and security of. They're trying to use a number of visualization tools to try and capture out a sort of single perspective of what's happening in their supply chains. And it creates far too many dashboards, metrics, and reports that people really don't know what to focus. They're getting visualization, but they're not getting insights. Underneath that, there's got the volume of data, the volume, velocity, variability, and variety of data that's hitting businesses and that they need to manage is increasing exponentially. But most companies are still struggling to be able to control their, basic master data, such as lead times, prices, and bill of materials. They now need, however, to manage internal and external data, both structured and unstructured. And because they're struggling, they're getting multiple versions of the truth, and multiple data is held in different processes and platform silos. So it becomes this very difficult, once again, to get this end-to-end perspective. The analysis, therefore, they're taking is a very high level, too high, and it's too slow to enable accurate responses in this incredibly volatile marketplace. And the reviews of that data is not frequent enough, it's not granular enough, and it's not accurate enough. This is not helped by the organizational structures. We are still very much looking at businesses who have a top-down, Frederick Winslow Taylor, command and control kind of structure. It's split into hierarchical organizational structures with functional processes, functional metrics, and functional skills that were really designed for the industrial age, not the digital. There's a big focus still on managing process and activities, not on being focused around decisions and outcomes. And I'll come back to that later. And we spend far too much time on repetitive, non-value adding tasks. And of course, one of the things that's underpinning all of this is our legacy skills and our legacy mindsets. We're still very much tied down to the way things used to run. And we're so busy because of all of this noise that we don't have enough time to spend developing new skills. People are really struggling to adapt fast enough to the pace of change. And we also have some sort of leadership driven barriers here, these mindset behaviors that take place in organizations where the focus from the top is very much short term, just trying to survive in all of this chaos, constantly focusing on costs, insisting that we see an immediate return on investment from any sort of major innovations, constant pressure to meet your analyst expectations, which means there's a real lack of a long-term vision underpinned by these silo behaviors, agendas, and metrics. And one of the most damaging sort of mindsets and behaviors I see is this complete fear of taking risks. So the organization effectively, plays not to lose, rather to win. So when we look at innovation or technology or digital, that really a lot of companies are looking at it in a way akin to this bit of this, cartoon on the side here, which is, yeah, let's digitize, but let's not necessarily change the way we do things. So really what you end up being is digitizing and not digitally transforming. And all of these old mindsets, these operating models and these methods, they're no longer fit for purpose in the upswing. We're still seeing companies that are not focused on building value networks. They're not looking at the form and function of inventory, only the quantity and the value. They're not actively designing the goods flow through the supply chain from the customer back, and they're still operating in functional silos. All while at the same time, the long tail's getting longer, the chain is getting more complex and more disruptive, the customer is getting more demanding, and of course the lead times are getting shorter. So like this meme that I'm particularly fond of, with everyone sitting in their burning house saying, yeah, this is fine. It quite obviously isn't fine. There's a lot going on, and we need to be able to change the way we act and to change the way that we think in order to adapt to this changing environment. Now, one of the challenges is that a lot of organizations see what's happening at the top, they see the results, and as long as the results are still good, as long as we're still making a profit, despite all of this chaos, then they don't necessarily see what's going on beneath the surface. And of course, what's going on beneath the surface is chaos management. Huge amounts of chaos management, specifically in times like now, lots of order expediting, firefighting, penalties for lost sales or unplanned discounts, doing multiple shipments and back orders, huge number of countless unproductive meetings, just trying to figure out what the heck's going on now. As data quality starts to degrade, we get a lack of trust in it, which means we make worse and worse decisions, and we get frustrated and overwhelmed employees and unhappy customers, of course. Now, here's something which I think is really interesting in what's happening. What's happening is, as we go through this chaos, we get orders at the door, and we buy things, we sell things, we make things, we do all of these things. The transactions of what happened are recorded and reported, but the issues that we're facing are never really captured. The decisions that we make are never really documented, and therefore the lessons are never really learned. So the company itself develops no real organizational-wide memory of the issues and their root causes and the actions taken. There might be individual knowledge, but there isn't organizational knowledge. So while individual experience may increase, the organization's collective intelligence does not. And it also exposes the company the risk of knowledge leakage as we rely more and more on key individuals and firefighters and daily heroes. We also expose ourselves to more risk. What happens if they get run over by a bus? What happens if they just decide they've had enough and leave? We're pouring so much knowledge into the hands of individuals. And we have too much reliance on these individual heroes and firefighters to save the day. And as a line I've used for about 20 years now is, with most organizations that I've tried to help, is what you generally find is that your best firefighter is almost always your biggest arsonist, because they end up, saving the day by stealing tomorrow. But they contain a huge amount of knowledge about how the business runs independently. And we keep relying on these people. We keep going back to them. So what knowledge do they have that will be damaging if lost? What decisions do you rely on them to make, and what information experience guides their decision making? And does anyone know but them? Now, interestingly, I don't know if you've seen this before. This is something called the Quadrant of Urgency and Importance. It comes from a book called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen R. Covey. And unfortunately, it's the late Stephen R. Covey. He died about 5 years ago, unfortunately. If you ever get a chance to do that, go read that book or go through the training on that. I would highly recommend it. It is very much life-changing. And I use this in my transformation engagements. And I ask companies, say, tell me, of the things that are in your day, where do you spend your time? Do you spend your time on things that are firefighting, that are urgent and important and press on you? Do you spend it on fighting someone else's fires in Q3, on the false alarms, which are the ad hoc interruptions, or solving other people's urgency issues, or filling out update reports, etc.? Do you spend it in Q2, trying to do some fire prevention, planning, preparation, strategy, all that sort of stuff? Or do you spend it, in Q4 in some of the other areas? And generally what you find is most people spend their time between Q1 and Q3, and then they have to go for Q4 for a break, because we call that the sort of Bermuda Triangle of inefficiency. And these are the real results from a number of different companies. And I sort of topped them up, and across about 10 different organizations, 61% of their time is spent fighting fires, 28% are spent fighting someone else's fires or helping other people to fight fires. Very small percentage is spent in there, but actually only 10% is spent on fire prevention. Now, of course, as you would imagine, the more time we spend on fire prevention, the less time we have to spend fighting fires, but we don't have the time to do fire prevention because we're so busy firefighting. And this gets then locked into our behaviors. So the same thinking and the same behaviors plus the same metrics creates the same result, and then we do the same thing tomorrow. So we end up in this perennial sort of Groundhog Day kind of existence where, we get to the end of the day, we've managed to get orders out the door, we've managed to do whatever we needed to do, and then we go back and do it again tomorrow. The challenge, of course, is that we are in this most disruptive period, but we're at the start of the curve of the change. And as I said earlier, things are never going to be as slow as they are right now, specifically from a technological perspective. And I particularly like Roy Amara's quote here, that so we tend to overestimate the effect of technology in the short run, but we underestimate it in the long run. So things like, autonomous vehicles is a good example, or drones. We've talked about these for a little while now, but we don't see them. So we don't see drones, we don't see autonomous vehicles. Therefore, we believe that we've overestimated their disruptive ability. And you'd be right, because I certainly, when I wrote Transition Point, I expected to see autonomous vehicles on the road, at least certainly, a small section of them in probably the US by 2020. And we're now in 2022, and yet they're still incredibly rare and limited to only a few logistics-based environments. But we know that once they become proven and safe and they scale, then it's going to completely transform the logistics industry, for example. And what we're seeing, and if you've seen any of my presentations before, this will be very familiar to you. The one thing I've talked about now for about a decade is this what I call the 6-wave automation triple whammy, which is whammy number one is this: we're facing the automation of all the things that we used to do with our hands, the things on the end of our wrists. Whammy number two is the new thing that has a lot of people spooked because it was only us that could do it previously, which is the automation of knowledge-based tasks or cerebral activities. And whammy number three is effectively those two coming together across the end-to-end supply chain, underpinned by technologies such as blockchain and the IoT and 5G and 6G telephony, until we get a complete convergence where machine brains are effectively, collecting information and driving the actions of machine hands across the end-to-end supply chain. And the real kicker is, of course, that developments in all of these are happening at exactly the same time. So one of the things we're sure about is that the future is going to look nothing like the past. Yet we still behave in a way that's very much past-centric. And one of the things we're finding out amongst all of this chaos is it's almost impossible for humans to react to the speed of change in this period. The digital market requires a level of agility and responsiveness and decision-making that is already unachievable, and it's only going to get worse. We simply can't handle the velocity, volume, variety, and volatility of data that hits our business every day. We can't make decisions at the speed and the accuracy needed. We have too much knowledge trapped in the heads of individuals and not documented. And the data we use to make our key decisions is generally not at the right level or at the right frequency or at the right granularity for today's 24/7 real-time world. And, in order to solve these mission critical problems requires accessing multiple systems and multiple spreadsheets in order to diagnose and fix. And we don't have access because of the sort of functional and disaggregated nature of our systems. And what we're seeing as well is the volume of SKUs and the network complexity is forcing planners to either just focus most of their attentions on just a few key products and let the long tails to handle itself, or manage things at a higher aggregate level. So we see our plans being made on past history, on averages and at aggregate family level. And really what they are is that they're too inaccurate to be useful. At a marketplace that exists like we're doing right now, we need to be effectively planning at SKU level. So what we're seeing is that the demand for high quality decision making is completely outstripping our ability to supply it. So our limited linear learning capability is a barrier in an exponential world. So we need a sort of exponential level of decision making, but there's a gap between that and the level of decision making that we're capable of if we don't have any support from things like digital tools and machines. So the reality for every business is we're in that zone where that gap exists between what's needed and what we're capable of doing. And this scale complexity of decision making in the digital area really requires us to have a new way of working. Now, one of the mindset shifts that needs to take place is we need to stop looking at digital tools as a way to complete tasks and actually start to look at them a better way to make the right decision. You see, across our end-to-end supply chain, we make thousands of decisions that need to be made every day, but they're not joined up. They're generally made on gut feelings, on consensus meetings, or on past knowledge. And we need to do better than that. And what we're seeing is people like McKinsey quietly, identifying that, the cost of not being able to make these decisions is significant. Managers at a typical Fortune 500 company may waste more than 500,000 days a year on ineffective decision making. And that translates to about $250 million in wages annually being spent on on trying to make ineffective business decisions. And he said in the bottom here, decision makers complain about everything from a lack of real debate to convoluted processes and over-relying on consensus and death by committee to unclear organizational roles, information overload, and company cultures that lack empowerment. And we're even finding sort of things that we've been talking about for a long time now, like sales and operations planning, are not appropriate anymore in their current form. It doesn't mean that the process of getting people from across the organization together in a room to create an aligned plan forward is not appropriate, and that certainly should continue. We have major decisions to make, and we need to make them as a team. But the process itself is driving the agenda, when actually right now we need the market to drive the agenda. A lot of S&OP and IBP is synonymous with a monthly cycle. This time frame is designed around the process, not the market or the customer or the SKU needs. We're also not analyzing data frequently enough or detailed enough to provide timely strategic responses to market disruptions. And what we're finding, companies therefore have an army of planners who are effectively no longer able to operate in this new reality. And I will talk to you in a little bit about one of the companies that we've been working with, Unilever, who has realized that we have thousands of planners across their organization, and they can't plan anymore. They simply can't plan. They can't react and respond at the speed of the market. They're actually becoming bottlenecks, and we need to do better, and we have to move to technology to enable us to do better. Because the idea of monthly planning using corrected sales history to plan the next 24 months, when that next 24 months looks nothing like the past 24 months, increasingly makes less sense. Gartner has really identified this and said, look, the decisions are becoming more complex, more connected, more context specific, and more continuous. So the level of complexity of the decisions that we're actually having to make are going up exponentially. So the old way of making decisions, that sort of separating decisions into strategic, into tactical, into operational, and sort of, having clear lines between them, no longer applies. And I would argue, actually, it never really did. We just behaved that way in that sort of top-down command and control way because it was, it made logical sense and it was hierarchical, and that's the way our cultures were. Decisions have always had tactical, strategic, and operational consequences, but the market right now just exposes to what extent that becomes true. So I'd like to use an example, if I may. I'd like to use the example of something that's becoming increasingly important to every company around the world, which is sustainability. Now, COP26 has just taken place. A lot of government leaders have just put their hands in the air and signed up to their government and their country doing a lot to reduce CO2 emissions or to become, carbon neutral by 2030 or reach a point of net zero. If you think about that, I mean, there is a mix there of strategic, tactical, and operational decisions that a business would have to make. At a strategic level, we're constantly trying to figure out what is the right customer strategy for our supply chain. Do we focus on responsiveness or reliability or cost or asset utilization? And then, of course, sustainability comes in. What impact does that have to the way we, to the strategy of our supply chain? At a tactical level, how should we design our supply chain network? What and where should we locate our plants and DCs? What vendors should we select? What Incoterms should we use? And at an order by order level, we should make decisions around things like modes of transport, on whether or not to consolidate a shipment, whether to go by air freight or sea freight, what order to prioritize, etc. So sustainability affects all of those elements at the strategic level, tactical level, and operational level. And of course, each one of those has to tie up. The operational decision should really be in line with our strategic decision, because the reality is it doesn't right now, but it needs to. So let's take the UN as an example. The UN's got a whole host of sustainable development goals. And if we zoom in and have a look at just climate action, for example, and look at the CO2 emissions, you can see that every company in the world right now, for those companies that exist in parts of the world where their governments are signing up to this, I should say, are being forced now to be able to report and reduce the amount of carbon emissions that they generate. And as you see at the bottom here, companies like Accenture had a look and said, only a very small percentage, only 5% of Europe, for example, big firms are actually on course for that. But this is that sort of perfect mix of an issue that is both incredibly complex, but also being mandated. And, whenever I talk about this to supply chain directors, they sort of put their heads in their hands because, they're already under a lot of pressure already. But the reason why they're going to have to is because things like the cost per carbon has risen fivefold in the last 3 years. So we're seeing a massive increase in the price of carbon, which means the cost of the penalties that are going to be applied to businesses are also going to be significant. And we're going to have to see a change in the way we operate. I mean, really right now, for a lot of companies, ESG is something on the sidelines. It's a nice to have. It's it used to be viewed as a sort of a hygiene factor, something to put in our marketing pitch, not something to really work on. But now, of course, it's very much something to be focusing on alongside sort of profit and cash flow and growth. But in the future, we see increasingly that, climate action and climate change action and sustainability will be at the center of most organizations' business. It's going to be at the core of how business gets done. But it's not going to be an easy transition for companies to make. So let's take scope 3 emissions, for example, here. So scope 3 are all other indirect emissions from activities of the organizations. And then covers all things like transportation. So if we just pick on transportation, both inbound and outbound, and if we have a look at that, well, what's that mean? What does it mean for a supply chain manager that you need to manage that? Well, the first task they need to do is they need to be able to report on them. So we need to report on, what our CO2 emissions were. We also need to monitor our current CO2 emissions through tracking and analysis. And ultimately, we need to be able to predict our future emissions through simulation and modeling. And then really what we want is not to report on emissions, but actually reduce them. So take action in real time to reduce our emissions. Reporting is never going to be enough because the past cannot be changed. The present and the future, however, can. But as I said before, it's complicated. The amount of data and the amount of intelligence required to not just report on emissions, but reduce them on a day-to-day basis is enormous. I'll explain. So firstly, if you're going to really be able to report on your end-to-end supply chain, you need to understand what your end-to-end supply chain looks like. So we need to do some geo-mapping here. We need to understand where it starts and where it stops. Who takes responsibility at what point? How do I decide that? Do I look at my Incoterms, for example? Where does it end? Where's my physical logistics nodes? Who are my vendors? Where are my factories? Where are my warehouses? Where are my decoupling points? Who are my customers? Where are they located? Which part of the journey am I responsible for? Which part am I not responsible for? Where are products sourced and where are they stored? Which modes of transport do we use? Do we move by freight? Do we move by air? What happened in the past as well? Where are the distance traveled for each stage by each mode? And then we need to be able to take that information and translate it into a current carbon footprint. What is the average emissions per mile kilometer per mode of transport? Where do I get the information about that from? What engine size and fuel source did the road vehicles use? Were they diesel? Were they petrol? Were they hybrid? Were they electric? I need to know that in order to be able to calculate what my carbon footprint is. What is the CO2 emissions for each leg in the supply chain by that transport mode? Whose responsibility was it to manage and report emissions? What weight and volumes flew through each node and by what mode? How many times has that mode been used? And where do you get the data from about all of the above? Is it internally sourced or externally? What system is it held on? How accurate is it? How frequently is it updated? How do I get access to it? And who's responsible for maintaining it? These are all challenges that are going to be faced on every business just to report on what's happened. But actually, the real challenge is they don't want to report on it and want to reduce it. So in order to reduce it, I need to understand what my future projected carbon emissions are on my supply chains. So I need to understand what my projected sales estimates down at an SKU vendor level and customer level to determine my projected volumes. Now, what external factors affect the decision-making process that I'm likely to make there? Maybe the emissions rates per vehicle type on the engine size and the fuel source. Current and projected fuel prices might have an effect on it. Projected energy prices by source, renewables versus fossil fuels, shipping costs per mode of transport, the exchange rates, mileage that's likely to be covered, volume shipped, the utilization rates. Again, where do I get accurate and timely information on each of these elements? And what is the impact on emissions, cost, cash, and service of each decision? Does that change my decision-making process? And what if my sustainability objective impacts my customer objective? So in order to be able to make those decisions, I actually really need to understand what is the strategic priorities and the trade-offs I'm prepared to make for each supply chain. So for each of the supply chain in my business, I need to understand what the SKUs and the customers are within them, what the strategic supply chain drivers are, and how I measure success. Then I need to understand, are these measures of success joined up end to end? Are we all pulling in the same directions? What are the acceptable trade-offs for each supply chain? Where am I prepared to sacrifice a little bit of service in order to save more cost? Where am I prepared to put more inventory in to improve service, for example? What are the key decision points in the supply chain? So for example, if we change from air freight to sea freight, it may reduce emissions, but it's also going to increase my lead times. Which is more important to you? Does this change dependent on the impact and the order or the customer? Do you optimize your supply chain for low carbon or low cost, for speed or sustainability, for agility or affordability? You need to know this. What happens when there's a conflict between those two priorities? What wins? What are the projected inventory and service implications of decisions and the impact, the financial impact of those decisions? And what are the penalty costs? How are you able to trade off any customer penalties that you make for either late deliveries or for failing service compared to your carbon penalties that you might incur if you air freight or expedite something? And then actually you've got to take all of that information and use it in real time. So I need to be able to use the strategic trade-off information combined with the projected sales data and the carbon impact in order for the system to recommend the optimal way to minimize carbon emissions whilst also maximizing the other strategic objectives. I need to be able to use this information to simulate, model, and propose changes in the supply chain network in order to reduce emissions whilst also optimizing my other strategic imperatives such as service, cost, and cash. And I actually need to make decisions at a transactional level that understand the strategic trade-offs and their impact. that understand the impact of each decision on service, cost, cash, and carbon, and act to deliver the best strategic outcome for your business. And there are a number of different levers that we can pull. We could change the mode of transport. We can delay one delivery and actually consolidate shipments together. We could use different routes. We could use different Incoterms to share the impact and the risk. We could do some reshoring or nearshoring of manufacturers or DCs. We could switch suppliers. We could set up new 3PL partnerships or outsource. We can renegotiate contracts, etc. The goal is going to be to reduce CO2, not just report on it, but you need to be able to have information that enables you to effectively make these real-time operational decisions. And of course, when I go through this with businesses, most supply chain leaders kind of put their heads in their hands and start to sob because it's hard enough already. So how do we do? Can we just overlay all of that complexity on top of our current systems and our current ways of working? And of course, the answer is no. This is not a slight tweak to the way we do business. You know, in the same way that the light bulb wasn't a result of continuous improvements to the candle and the motor car didn't emerge continuous tweaks to the horse, you know, we are not looking here at just a continual tweak to our processes and our way of operating. You know, we require a complete rethink. And technology is enabling us to actually undertake that rethink. So to manage the 6-wave speed and complexity, we look to whammy number 2, for example, and certainly whammy number 3, to see what can machines do for us. So imagine, if, for example, we could move from an era where people are doing work supported by machines to an era where machines start doing work being guided by the people. And what we're able to do right now with a number of tools called decision intelligence and cognitive automation is digitize, augment, and automate the enterprise-wide decision-making process. So the first 5 waves of technological process all involve machines with very clearly defined inputs, observable pathways, and fixed outputs, from everything from the spinning jenny all the way through to the laptop or the desktop computer. But now we have a new AI revolution, which is building machines that learn, adapt, optimize, and focus on accumulating experience, where they take a wide and varied set of inputs, have an internal processing that in many cases can be unobservable and unknown pathways. It's figuring out how to make decisions itself, and it creates a wide and varied set of outputs. Using an example of a company I'm working with here, Aero, you know, they're doing something cognitive automation, which is the digitization, augmentation, and automation of decision making. And if we can describe how we make decisions, we can codify them. But that themselves is a big challenge for a lot of organizations. Why do you do the things you do? Why do you make the decisions that you make? And if you can codify it, then of course we can actually start to automate it. But that requires a digital platform that's both connected, both outside and in, real time, always on, thinking, learning, and autonomous. It's a system for decision making that is being guided by people, but machines are doing all the heavy lifting. And that's enabling them to create companies to create control towers effectively that are able to analyze demand and supply in real time, in the same way that an airport's control tower monitors its airspace in real time. And I've used this analogy for years that, you know, if you were flying into an airport and the people who ran that airport said, we don't have a control tower that looks at what's going on right now. We decide what to tell the pilot based on what had previously happened. So we look at the condition of the planes that had landed, which ones crashed, which ones arrived late, which ones had a few damaged passengers inside, which ones had lost some luggage. And we use that decision making in order to guide what happens in the real time in the airspace. You would not use that airport. But that is quite interestingly how we manage our businesses. We look at, you know, transactional data of past events, stores of record, and we use that as a decision making process for the future. Well, of course, really what we want to be doing right now is looking in the airspace that's happening, things are happening right now, and making decisions based on that. Now, there's a whole sort of journey that companies are going through here. And the very sort of the early levels, level 1 and level 2, are sort of moving from sort of descriptive diagnosis, machines being able to describe what's happening, and to ones where they're able to predict what's likely to happen or predict what's happening here, which is really humans making decisions using data from machines. And a lot of companies are kind of at that point. And it's kind of useful, but not so much, because, you know, if I take this motorway example, I already kind of knew I was stuck in a traffic jam, and I can see myself that there's something up ahead. You're not telling me what to do about it, however. See, it's level 3 where it starts to get really interesting. And like a GPS system now, we don't want a GPS that tells you you're stuck in traffic. We want a GPS system that says there are traffic issues up ahead and I would redirect you. I would recommend that you redirect. This is the impact it's going to have on your journey time. And this is when you're likely to get home. This is kind of what we expect now in our cars. And it's really now what we should expect in our business. And this is humans making decisions using recommendations from machines. And I think the GPS is a good example of that. But level 4 really is the self-driving car. It's the self-driving supply chain. It's decision intelligence driving the show. And it's machines making decisions using parameters completely set by humans and acting autonomously, but increasingly learning from experience. And we're having these connected decisions across the enterprise. So the tool is able now to connect to all of these different functions and all these different departments and all these different elements and join them all together, being able to see connections between different things that us humans simply can't do, and create sort of decision-orientated enterprise-wide control towers that give us executive views and demand views, procurement views across the end-to-end enterprise. And they're able to understand context and understand interrelationships between each other. So we're seeing the rise of the cognitive, what I call the sense and respond enterprise. And it's about smarter decisions, not about more efficient tasks. So if we take a neuron, like a brain neuron here, we get a signal, we send some new information. But in a supply chain context, it could be GDP predictions or exchange rate deviations or commodity price increases. Maybe we're seeing sales, retailer promotion info or weather updates or geopolitical information, significant demand increases. And that signal causes a reaction, a response. We make the decisions based on that, we make recommendations based on that, and we take actions based on that. And that action could be to reprioritize fulfillment or stockpile key materials or reschedule production or switch suppliers and consolidate. Now, the thing that makes that decision either good or bad is really the quality of information that's feeding it. The frequency of the signal, the speed of the signal, the accuracy of the signal, and the granularity of the information. And as I said earlier, we're just simply, as humans, not able to process the sheer volume of information at the frequency we need, at the speed we need, and at the accuracy we need to make those decisions. So we need machines to help us. Now, Gartner is recognizing that decision intelligence is the next evolution of machine support. So we're starting to see this thing called decision intelligence. And I did an article, which you can read on my LinkedIn profile, called 2022, the year of decision intelligence, the year of the decision. Because what's happening is, organizations that are using these tools are starting to create a collective intelligence that sits on top of their organization, a sort of thinking, learning, permanent, and interestingly, an analyzable memory of every recommendation it makes, every business decision, their logic, and their outcome. And this collective intelligence is always on, it's real time, it's connected inside and out, autonomous thinking and learning. And as the CEO of ERA says, there can be no organizational intelligence without memory. Otherwise, we're just repeating the same mistakes over and over. The machine has to learn. So it's developing an organizational memory. So rather than being reliant on individual experience, we're now developing a collective knowledge and insight that we can interrogate. So it's creating human learning loops as well as machine learning loops. So rather than just having individuals that are specialists in profit and loss accounting or product costing or inventory control or whatever, they're now becoming interconnected, and we can see across multiple different areas of the business, and we can share that information. But most importantly, we understand the impact. What happens if I reduce my inventory? What does that have on my profit and loss accounting or my, my service levels or my transport planning? We can see the relationships between those different actions. Now, that's all well and good, but humans must still be able to trust this digital brain. We still need them to be glass boxes, not block boxes. And I think this is where a lot of organizations have made mistakes with machine learning, because the machine learning algorithms are kicking out outputs, but we don't understand how it came to that conclusion. So decision intelligence allows companies to codify their key decisions, capture outcomes, and explain the rationale behind the results. See, people need to be able to trust the digital brain. This was something I learned back 20 years ago when I used to work with APO. It doesn't matter how good or accurate the number the machine spits out. The human who has to put their name against it has to understand where it came from. So they need to understand its decision-making process. And this is leading to both human and machine learning loops. If the human doesn't trust the recommendation, it can override it, tweak it, making it smarter. But if the machine was right and the human intervention wrong, then the human learns from the machine. And the human learns as it goes along and consistently tests assumptions and biases. The interesting thing is what we're seeing with these tools is it records all of this. So you can say, you know, John, you intervened on the recommendations made by the decision intelligence system 4 times, and 4 times it's been proven that you made things worse. Why do you keep making these adjustments? So we're actually, for the first time ever, capturing this kind of level of information. The challenge we have, of course, is this requires a completely different way of thinking about your organization to make use of it. And companies that are using digital tools so far in the last sort of 5 or 6 years have really experienced something that I call digital disappointment, because they've been digitizing rather than digitally transforming. So we've seen lots and lots of headlines that look like this, that really say, you know, most of these projects have not delivered a sustainable return on investment. And that's because they're not thinking big. They're not looking at this as a way to transform the business, but simply how to sort of digitize their existing processes. So companies are investing a lot of money in traditional applications like supply chain planning, but they're focusing on doing the same things they've always done. And few people have questioned the fact that the workflows and architectures themselves are largely outdated. So they're talking about digitization of existing processes when the focus is on being faster and hands-free. Really gets sort of lost within the side. Visualization, most companies spend a lot of money on visualization, and it's helpful, you know, don't get me wrong, your visualization across the supply chain is incredibly helpful, but unless it's focused, aligned, and actually creates insights that you can particularly act on, then the value of all of that is hidden and in the volume, and result we get lots of confusions. We get companies that are, you know, become data rich but insights poor. And we're seeing that again and again and again. We have companies with great data lake visions, but it actually turns very quick into a data swamp reality. You know, we've got all of this data in this data lake, and actually a lot of it's now out of date. A lot of it, we don't understand how to use it, and we're not really getting the sort of value from the investment we've made into it. It requires a different change of thinking. This is what the problem is. It's not about a change in technology. You know, the problem with transformation is never a lack of ideas. It's really more about the change of behavior. You know, there is a reality that not every organization is going to be able to use these technologies, but the ones that fail don't do so because they're unable to succeed, but simply because it's their inability to adapt to them. So it's not external events that are the architect of the failure or technology themselves, but their inability to adapt. This is why we see a lot of new startups that aren't weighed down by the baggage of the past being able to be very successful in the short term. You see, successful digital transformation is actually nothing really much to do about technology. Technology is an enabler, but it's about transforming the mindset, culture, and strategy of the organization. The what and how of technology only really makes sense when it's applied to a compelling why. See, digital is not a project, it's a journey, not a destination. It is a paradigm shift into the organization's mindset, an opportunity to redefine what you stand for, how you operate, and what you reward. See, all of this new hardware and all of this new software actually requires completely new thoughtware in order to be successful. And one of the big interesting pieces of thoughtware that needs to change is, you know, we need to stop thinking about the way things used to be done. You know, we have to accept that what may have been true may no longer be. And if everyone going back to sort of Francis Bacon here, who's talked about, you know, if a man will begin with certainties, he shall end in doubts, but if he will be content to begin with doubts, he will end in certainties, right through to one of my favorite quotes from Mark Twain, which says, it ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble, it's what you know for sure that just ain't so. Kind of articulates the problem. We become so attached to our past knowledge that we really struggle to believe that things now are different. And I think, you know, Alvin Toffler sums it up quite nicely, which he said, the illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. So companies like Unilever, who have digital intelligence, work with companies like ERA, have said, you know, we had to make a real mindset shift. We had to go from knowing it all to learning it all. And that's now one of our mantras. We really needed to open our minds to what's possible and find out what's out there. Now, that'll make a huge amount of, you know, hubris there to be able to do that. And the companies like Unilever that lead the charge actually said, realized things that they didn't believe were true previously, that things like that every dollar they spent on agility has got a 10 times return on every dollar they would have spent on forecasting or scenario planning. And Unilever has moved from monthly planning based on processes to planning every 3 days based on needs for some of their, you know, key products. So the question I would ask you in the audience there is, wait, if you're going for a digital transformation project, are you digitizing your current business, or are you using digital to create your future one? Don't do digital, become digital. And the way to do that is to seek out the inherent simplicity at the heart of your business. Resist the temptation to believe that complex issues require complicated solutions. We will to thrive in a world that's becoming exponentially more complex. The answer is to simplify, not complicate. So go back to your first principles and build from there. Go back to, if you've seen me a number of times before, if you've seen my presentations, we need to have this Copernican business revolution where we move from putting ourselves at the center and the customers around us to putting the customer at the center. So let's go back to first principles. First principles thinking is the act of boiling a process down to the fundamental parts that you know are true and building up from there. Who are your customers? What is their job to be done? How do you help them do that job? What do they value? What do they not value? And how do they measure the success of your contribution? So once you understand that, then suddenly technology becomes clear. So if we look at tools like decision intelligence, I look at that as like an iPhone, effectively. The iPhone becomes a very expensive way to make phone calls. It was a very, to move from my Nokia to an iPhone required a significant amount of additional expenditure if all I was going to do was make phone calls. But because the iPhone isn't a phone, it's a platform. It hides the complexity of a lot of different things and enables me to get access to the information I need when I need it, personalized it for my need. And that's exactly what I see decision intelligence as being, a platform upon which you can build the tools needed and the decisions needed to control your future business. It's natural for companies to focus on digitizing and automating the decisions they already make. But this limitation in thinking creates a limitation in potential. The real value doesn't come from the decisions you already make, but from the decisions that you currently cannot make. Don't just replicate the decisions that your best planner, scheduler, or stock controller would make on their best day, but consider what decisions they could make if they had no limitations. And the power of cognitive automation and decision intelligence is set free when you stop constraining yourself based on what you used to be able to do. So 6 points to remember here when you want to be towards decision-driven, not data-driven. I haven't got time to go through them all, but start with questions and not data. Make decision makers lead the projects, not the data scientists. Ponder the unknown rather than the knowns. Go wide and then dive deep. Don't use the data that you already have, but think first about the data that you need, and look forward and not look back. So rather than start with a lake of data and use data scientists to find insights, start with defining the desired outcomes and establish the decisions, levers, and support you need. And then let that define your data requirement. So start with the challenge and the performance you're trying to solve, then figure out what decisions you need to make, then the levers you need to pull, then the level of cognitive support you need, and then the data. So if your performance challenges need more agility or reduce operating costs, etc., the decisions could be about when and how you move product. And the response, what happens when something goes wrong. The levers you can pull are you could change the dispatch date or the transport mode or the level of consolidation or the transport route or the carrier. There's a whole load of different levers you can pull, which means you need cognitive support on inventory coverage or site variability or future volumes or future freight prices or potential data. These sorts of things that would help you to decide which lever to pull and what decision to make. And then use that to define what data you need in order to be able to make that better decision. Because if you can do this, then you can redirect all the effort, let the machine handle the firefighting and the false alarms and focus much more on fire prevention. So that your model actually looks more like this. You spend more time on strategizing, planning, and preparing, and a lot less on firefighting and false alarms. So we move from a planning process where we used to spend an 8-hour day with 7 hours spent gathering data, 45 minutes looking for trends, 10 minutes discussing with colleagues, and just 5 minutes making decisions, to actually where we let the machine do all the hard work. And then we spend most of our time planning and strategizing. Now I'm going to finish up here because I'm running out of time. I do apologize. The thing is, this is hard. It is hard. Paradigm shifting is hard. And Neil Ackerman, who's the global supply chain executive at Johnson & Johnson, I met him when he worked at Amazon and he worked at a company called Mondelez, which used to be Cadbury's, where I used to work. one of the smartest people, if not the smartest person I've ever met. You know, he watched a video with him recently. We said, this is really hard stuff. And that's why not many people do it. But I've learned over the years, if it's really hard, it's really worth doing, because it creates a competitive advantage for the long term for your customers and, of course, for your company. Once again, things will never be as slow as they are right now. So what are the decisions that you are making today that you wished you could? Is the way you're structured today stopping you from succeeding tomorrow? And the best way to predict the future is to create it. Thank you very much.
Wow. Thank you, Sean.
My timing, as always, is lousy.
But you're known for that. So it's fine. You're very passionate and you have lots to say and lots to share. So I don't know if anybody has any questions. There were points in that presentation where my brain kind of went into overload, especially around the sustainability and the CO2 emissions, and kind of how do people manage that, because there is so much information that you need to work out the best way to do it. Who does that? Do you have specialists that do that? You know, there are obviously tools that take care of that type of thing, but yeah, that for me was a sticky part of the presentation.
Yeah, it's a challenge, Tony. I mean, you know, I'm working, and there was a slide in there which had Era's logo on, which I shouldn't have done really. It was apologies, but I'm still working with Era at the moment, because you know, the moment I realized this is, you know, this is a paradigm shift, but the real value, which most people don't understand, is that actually, if you use it right, it connects to the complexity but hides the complexity, so that actually gives us that opportunity to have a foundation for the future that says, right, let's go back to first principles. The world is complex. We know that. We know it's variable. We know it's uncertain. These are known knowns. Let the machine handle that data gathering and that uncertainty managing. What are the things that we need to do in order to be successful moving forwards? What are the decisions that can make or break us? What data do we need in order to support that decision? What does a good decision look like? And actually, most companies don't do that. They don't define how they make a good decision, what defines a good decision for a bad decision. And they just, you know, they just hope they make lots of decisions and hope that they join up, you know, at the end of the day, and hopefully we get a good result. This asks really tough questions of business, but the business that can actually sit down and go, do you know what? I'm going to use this as an opportunity to reset and actually build on this platform and let the machine handle the complexity and provide me with recommendations and actually make better decisions, is the ones that are going to be successful. And I worry greatly for businesses who aren't able to make that leap, because I'm, you know, the companies that we're working with at the moment, Unilever, Merck, GlaxoSmithKline, Johnson & Johnson, these guys, they are getting it. If you're in the competition against them, the performance is going to be enormous moving forward.
Okay, so there's lots of good comments about the presentation, but nobody's coming up with questions, and it could be because they're trying to process all this information. So if you were to say, and I mean, if you think about it, for anybody to think differently about the way we do things, it's a challenge for anybody. You know, yes. It's so the question is, what is step one? So you want to go on this journey. We're in a state of complete flux at the moment. In addition to COVID, we had unrest, we had Transnet, the cyber attack, which left us all reeling. So, you know, we've got to change. We've got to do things differently. We know that, and we were firefighting. That's what we were doing. But what is that first step? You know, so that it doesn't look like this. What's the first bite of the elephant, if I can put it that way?
Yeah, and I think the first bite of the elephant, you know, can't be an efficiency thing. It has to be an effectiveness thing. It has to be, you know, we have the danger, the warning signs, I think, for a lot of companies are, we become so entrenched in the firefighting because we're being hit by so many different pieces of information, so much chaotic demand signals, supply signals, whatever, that we narrow the focus. It becomes so, you know, myopic in our perspective that we don't see the big threats. And we're so focused on the short term that actually we miss the long term. And that, I think, when you look at organizations that have failed, even all the big stories of companies that fell off the edge of a cliff and stuff, that almost to a man is kind of the reason. You know, they become fixated on the small things and lose sight of the big things. And I think if a company can take time to pause, say, right, we are in a new world. It operates in different rules. Let's look forwards, not backwards. Who are our future customers as well? They might be the same people we have right now. What are they going to want moving forwards? What is their job to be done? How is that changing given the new wave of technology that we have? How is it changing our expectations? Does it mean, for example, that our supply chain network is incorrectly structured in order to satisfy the needs of the future customer compared to the current one? Can we use technology to gain competitive advantages? Can we use them to service their needs better? It's got to be based around that, so that otherwise you end up, at an operational level, making changes there, but losing the strategic game.
100%, and that makes absolute sense. So everybody, you need to pause. You need to stop and give some serious thought to what's been discussed today. It's kind of like sink or swim. So put your what do you call those rubber bands, those float bands on, and get out there into the water. But it's been great to have you, Sean. Thank you so much for giving of your time and being
pleasure.
So supportive always of SAPIX in our community, and we will definitely have you back. It was a thoroughly enjoyable presentation. I think it's given everybody a lot to think about, and we look forward to having you back again. And thanks to everybody for joining us this afternoon, and we look forward to seeing you at our next SAPIX event.
Thanks very much, Tony. Thank you everyone for listening. Sorry I had more content than time, as always, but I hope you enjoyed it.
We did indeed, and hopefully you will be at SAPIX conference. And for those of you that have not yet booked, get online and get booking, because this conference is going to blow you out the water. Aside from the fact that you'll be able to physically sit down opposite somebody and have a cup of coffee.
How fantastic is that, hey? It's the little things.
It is the small things that matter at this point in time.
Thanks very much, everyone. I hope you enjoyed it. I believe that as recording of the video is going to be available, of the presentation, sorry, will be available for everyone as well.
Yeah, I think that everybody's going to have to take a run through that again so they can reabsorb everything that you went through.
Do you know what? I looked at the number of slides, and there's a lot, but it's usually less than I normally have. And I thought, this is going to be fine. I'll be done in this in 30 minutes.
No, but it's really good. It's really good content. I think it's spot on in terms of what it is that we need right now. We need those messages.
Yeah, they do. I must say, like I said, I think sometimes it gets brought to life when you actually see what I'm talking about. So when I talk about decision intelligence system and what sort of information it brings, it's if I was to do a demo of that, it would blow people's minds, because they're not. But it asks more questions of them that says, if your competitor is able to use this technology and you can't, what does that mean? Are you ready to make that mindset shift now? Because we, even for example, the CEO of ERA is frustrated that what is an enterprise-wide decision intelligence platform is constantly being used to do the same things other companies have always done. We needed to inventory. We wanted to optimize inventory. We wanted to, improve ATP. We wanted to improve planning. And you think, well, it can do so much more. What are the really big decisions? What are the things that could really hurt you? What happens if fuel prices double? What happens if commodity prices triple? What happens if, what does that look like? What does it do to your service? What happens, if you are forced to report on every mile of CO2 and the price of CO2 triples? What does that do to your bottom line? Would that mean would that justify a manufacturing plant movement? Would it justify changing vendors? Would it justify stop expediting via air and move to sea? What does that do to your lead times? Really complicated decisions that need to take place.
No, it does. One change brings an awful amount of questions and things that you need to think about. I've got a question here from Jonathan. How would you help?
I'm not taking questions from Jonathan. I'm sorry.
Jonathan's one of our good supporters. He's one of our good supporters, Jonathan. How would you help an organization understand that any system is not a silver bullet, but the actual issue is changing the behavior, was currently changing an ERP system, and I'm worried that we need to understand that we need to evolve and ensure we keep evolving with a customer-centric tilt rather than thinking we will solve all problems with the system.
Yeah, I mean that's the perennial challenge, really, isn't it? Which and there's been reasons why. If you look even back to when I started with SAP back in the early 1990s, and yes, I am that old. The companies that were very successful were companies that actually saw it as an opportunity to do a business process re-engineering, which is what it was based around. We would re-engineer our processes based around SAP or Oracle or whatever. The companies that used exactly the same tool but got very different benefits were those that just saw it as a change of technology. So we try to, they used to talk about, ZSAP, companies that would bastardize SAP to look like the system they've just come off. And you look at that and go, that's a very expensive way to achieve absolutely no benefits. So you're taking something that's been built around a whole series of best practice processes, and you've changed it to look like the system that you've just migrated off. And then you wonder why you've got no real ROI from that investment. And I think that's the same for any technology. If you use it as a technology, then it's a tool. But if you think, how can we, first ignore the tool, but think about what is it we need to do to be successful for our customers moving forwards. What is, and I always talk about, we've moved from products competing to supply chains competing to business models. So what are the business models? What are the combination of, a clearly defined customer segment, a unique value proposition that we believe that we can bring to them that no one else can, and then a collection of activities, our operations, to enable us to deliver that value proposition to that customer segment in a way that makes us unique. And that's just strategy that brings those elements together. And if you start with that rather than the technology, and then you think about, now that we're clear about what it is we're trying to do and for whom we're trying to do it and how we differentiate, then we look at, right, what are the measures of success? What are the processes that will enable us to actually deliver that? And then you look at technology and saying, and how does this technology help us do it better? Rather than starting first with the technology and then trying to figure the business processes and the metrics and fit them into that. Does that make sense?
Jonathan, does that help you? Give us a thumbs up.
No, definitely does help. It's actually quite on point. It does help.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Okay, one more question, and then we're going to go because we are really running over. But obviously, the people that are still here wanting to, I'm tongue-tied, you see, want to hear the answer. So, if other companies have done it, why is it still so hard to transform? Is it because companies don't share knowledge?
Well, I think that's a small part, actually. I think there is competitive advantage from retaining knowledge within companies, but actually I don't think that's the case. If you go to SAPIC's conference, there are companies that are more than willing to stand on stage and go, this has been the recipe behind our success. This is how we managed to do a great transformation. And you'll have an audience of people who nod sagely and take notes and then go back into their business, and then nothing changes. Because the organizational structure or the leadership behaviors or something stops it from happening, or they just get swamped by the urgency of Q1, as I call it. The firefighting activities just overload them, and then 6 months later you're going through your notes and you find some paperwork or some notes you made at the SAPIC's conference, and you go, oh yeah, I remember that presentation, that was quite good. And then it's, underlined as some key words that you made to yourself that said, this is what we must do when we go back in the office, and of course you haven't. So I don't think it's a case of not sharing knowledge. I just think it's allowing yourself the time to pause. It's being bold enough to be able to pause, and it's being brave enough to actually say, the things that we've done in the past might not be moving forwards, and actually I'm prepared to take on the cultural challenge as well as the technological challenge. And I think that one is where companies fail. Technology challenge is complicated, but actually it's a matter of a purchase order and an implementation project and some money, capex, and they can go, I can do that. Cultural challenge requires working with peers. It means potentially changing the way you work, changing your zone of responsibility, your organizational profile, behaving completely differently. And they go, that's a bit, I'm not sure about that. Reality is the latter one costs less than the first one, but if you get the latter one right, then the first one suddenly becomes much more valuable because you're aligning it with how you need to operate moving forwards rather than aligning it with how you've operated in the past.
Yeah. No, I mean, it makes sense. 100% sense. I mean, it's always, everybody talks about buying this big ERP system and spending an absolute fortune, but it doesn't do all the wonderful things that they promised us. Because if you do what you've always done, you're always going to get what you always got. So yeah, I think that kind of says it all. But Sean, we've taken enough of your time. Thank you so very much.
My pleasure.
And hope to see you at SAPICS in Cape Town.
I hope so too. That'd be lovely, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Hope everyone enjoyed it. Thank you for the invitation, and I'll speak to you soon.
Thanks, Sean.
Cheers,
Cheers,
everyone.
everybody.
Bye.